Now, we're finally going to get to the winterizing. Those who are in the beginner course, you may have already seen this graph, the beekeeper's dream. You're going to buy that package. It's going to build up, and you're going to have peak population right when the blackberries are in full bloom, and they'll continue on but taper down and not eat up all the stores like the Californians do. The population will taper down. There will be some knotweed flow here, fireweed, knotweed, okay. And then you'll have like maybe 20,000 going into the winter, but not too big because they eat more if they're too big. Okay, hive management ideal. I thought we better conceptualize a little on this winter thing. On the left-hand side, this is the annual cycle of the honeybee colony. Again, you're looking for this peak. And this is for Virginia, but Virginia's kind of close to us. They're only about, I put it over on the side. I put the latitude. If you remember your latitude rings that kind of go around, imaginary rings around the globe, and they tell you how far north you or south you are. 90 is the North Pole, 0 is the equator. It's just interesting that we sometimes don't realize that we are farther north or farther south. For example, I will often talk about the University of Guelph. They have some really good videos. They have a good one on how to light a smoker, how to set up a nuke. And they have like 20 of these, and they're little bite-sized digestible pieces on beekeeping. There's a whole set. Paul Kelly, I'll mention him. He's the one with the smoker. He's worked years at the University of Guelph in Ontario. Well, you'd think that's way far north of us. No, it's south. And so in some ways, their weather isn't that far off ours. Yes, they get more snow probably, but they are close to, I think, the lakes. I have to literally look that up. But sometimes remembering the latitude, if Snohomish is at latitude 47, Virginia is only at 37. I'm pulling off these, I'm rounding off over here. And quite often people will give you advice. Randy Oliver, I know, people say, well, he's in the same zone as us. Not really. Look over at those hours of daylight, and you'll see the difference between, okay, is this Virginia here? I'm really bad. Yes, that's Virginia. Okay. And then University of Guelph somewhere up here. And then Randy Oliver is somewhere here, yes. Almost Nevada, I think. It's like here. But we are up here, and that is quite a difference in day length, in the way the sun strikes us and such. So this curve will shift some with that. I'm kind of sidetracking, but sometimes when you're watching on YouTube, it helps to stop and say, how far north or south are they? But what really makes the difference, I think, is that like Virginia and North Carolina, we get a lot of YouTube videos from the southern areas and from up the East Coast. And the East Coast has the Gulf Stream coming up from Florida, coming all the way up. We have this wonderfully cold maritime and Arctic type breezes coming down, and our ocean currents come down. So that's more of an apprentice type topic, but I thought I'd mention it. Fall. We are already in fall. I mean, that sounds really weird, but to a beekeeper, this is really fall, even though we hardly got into summer. So we're talking the knotweed flow. We're looking at, okay, are they going to have enough stores? How's the pollen looking? I was surprised. A lot of the hives I've been looking at, including my own, weren't heavy on pollen. They're finally coming up a little bit, but that might be because I fed them some pollen stuff, because they were totally out. There was no bee bread ring around any of the brood. We're actually cutting back on brood. It's time to think about combining meat colonies. If you wait a month to do it, it's a stress on the bees right before we go into winter. If you think you need to requeen, this is really when you do it. Give her time to settle in. Make sure she works. A caged queen and queens in superstructure in packages and nukes, there's a 25% failure rate. Just accept it. It's the way it is. And that's a whole big long talk. There's a guy named David Tarpey, T-A-R-P-Y, and he does all kinds of videos. He's studying it on why the queens are failing so early. And why are we getting so many poor quality queens? And he suspects a number of things. It isn't just the miticides and the pesticides. It's also shipping problems. If you get too hot or cold in shipping, if they're shipped a little earlier to kind of cut down the profit margin, you know, if you ship the queen who's 14 days past emergence, and you can see that she's laying, and they're supposed to check that, and you stick her in a cage, she didn't get to lay a little while longer. Queens who get to lay a full month before they're put in the cage do better. They know that. But it's a profit margin thing. I got to get that next group of queens out of them, got to make money. So the queen shippers are part of the problem. We are talking about, okay, we're hefting our hives. We're going, are we going to need feed? Or we're still waiting for that knotweed, and it should be coming in. My buds were tight like a week and a half ago, and I've got to get back there and see. Pat has great fireweed. I just totally green with envy because Pat's fireweed. I couldn't believe how much she has out there. Okay, and the mite counts. Hopefully you've already done that. And this one is the easy one. I do like this. It has a measuring line inside. I did Varroa last time, so I won't bore the people who came last time, okay? Because I already talked for an entire class on that. But I'm assuming people will talk about anything you want to after I get done with my rush through. So you might have been kind of monitoring, but this isn't really a treatment. When you scoop your capping fork in to those drone, when this gets full of drone brood, and you scoop out your drones, and I can explain that better later if people want me to. You're looking because a drone brood attracts the female mites more strongly than regular brood. And so here's a poor drone that's been cut down in his prime, speared and pulled out. Okay. But it happens naturally too. When you're opening up your hives and you're separating the hive boxes and there's that bird comb, it's often drone combs. So when you're pulling it apart, take a peek and look to see if there's anything crawling and moving on your drones that shouldn't be. You often won't see anything in the spring, but if you just kind of keep an eye on it, it doesn't hurt to know what's going on in your hive. We did Varroa treatments last time. This should be on the page under files, the group discussion page. Now, the actual nuts and bolts of winterization. You will hear beekeepers again and again say, cold alone doesn't kill. The three things that kill are the cluster's too small. You have a weak or small colony. And it could have been a late swarm or split. It could have been that the yellow jackets, WHYHW, yellow jackets, hornets, wasps, came and robbed it out. It could be the Varroa. They just are weakened. Often they stop raising the brood when they're that weak. They could be actually starving. We have our summer dearth. It depends on where you are. Those people with lots of fireweed, for example, don't have a dearth right now. Those of us who don't have really good, don't have something that's really, really good, tend to go into dearth. But I do get knotweed. My bees will fly a mile to get to it. And condensation is the third killer. It's not just the moisture in the hive. Bees are tropical. They like high humidity, 50 to 80% greenhousing type humidity. Ugh. But they're okay with that. But wet, cold water that drips on them, especially when they're in cluster and they can't move. We'll go into cluster about why they don't move. Why don't you just move over if the faucet's dripping on your head? Well, they can't. And if you took beginner, you remember my tent analogy for how that condensation builds up. That when the person you're camping with, it's just that you seal everything up. Oh, we're going to be too cold. And they make you seal up even the top vents. And you wake up in the morning and everything's wet. The whole sides, the walls are all wet. Stuff is dripping on you down from the inside poles. There's so much condensation from just what you breathed out. Your respiration. All night long, 24/7 for a beehive. So that moisture has to be dealt with, and it can't be allowed to turn into condensation. And you always have to autopsy your dead outs. You really have to do your best. Take smartphone pictures, and that's where BeeBuddy, talk it through, try to figure out what went wrong. But hopefully nothing will go wrong because you're going to do all this right? Okay. the guidelines for the stores, that's the biggest thing. So we always end up talking about feed, and I'm sorry for those of you who just took this in beginner, but ideally, you will have, okay, 2 10-frame deeps, or you will have 3 8-frame deeps, or 3 8-frame, or 3 10-frame westerns. Top bar gets a little tricky. It's going to have to be at least that equivalent. So you're looking pretty much at the 20 frames, depending on how deep your and how wide your top bar is. They vary a little bit on how big the frame is when the bees build it out. And again, you need them to build out all the way to count it as a full frame. So half bees and brood, half stores. 100 to 120 pounds, including the woodenware. And the reason people say that is it's often hefting, using a luggage scale. Some people, if you really feel like you need to know, is it there, you can stand, if you've got the muscle, put the bathroom scale on the plywood and stand on. I've done that just to satisfy my own curiosity. If you have any doubt, I really recommend you just leave the honey in there. Better to have the excess stores in the spring than have a dead out. Better to feed them so they have extra honey syrup. It's just, you know, sugar syrup honey. It's not the most nutritious, but it is better for them than dry feed. And consider a spring honey harvest. There are people who do this on purpose. They wait to see if they want it. The bees take care of it. A few types of honey will granulate on you. And I should put a picture. Karen Perro, who took this class, I think the last time, she had ivy honey that granulated on her, turned into white sugar right in the combs. So she's going to watch now. She said she gets a pretty good ivy honey harvest because of some hillsides that are right behind her. And so she's going to pull that honey off next time because it's just going to granulate. And it's hard for the bees to get to. Technically they can, but they'll eat anything else first. Now, I gave you this 100, 120 because new beekeepers have to have some math. Really, you need those figures. You need the comfort of having something that seems definite while we're saying, it's your best judgment, you know, well, you sort of, and yeah, and 2 people tell you different things. One thing you do have to understand is more stores are used in a warm winter than a cold. And I put in a few graphs later on about the cluster and the way the bees break up the cluster and then reform the cluster. And my personal tragedy was 2019. The snow fell and then stayed on the ground for 5 weeks, which never happens in this area. Snow on the ground for 5 weeks? Okay, and it was sunny too. And it reflected light up. And I had one hive that got fooled and I never checked. I knew that that was a strong hive. I knew it didn't have mites. I knew it had plenty of food. And those silly bees, those Italifornians, they've got so much Italian blood in them, I guess. They like big families, and they took every lick of honey or pollen they had, they cleaned the hive and raised brood. They thought that spring was around the corner. The daylight fooled them, which I guess I should have, I should have at least cracked the inner cover and seen what they were up to. I didn't think to do that, and I should have checked the feed, but I was so sure they were okay. Well, they weren't. There's a financial consideration about taking the honey off. If you do and you know they need the sugar back, you have to do it. Some people say, oh, I can't take away their honey. And other people go, $100, $1.50 an ounce for honey and 50 cents a pound for sugar. Well, there's practical economics, so you decide. Banked honey is the best spring feed with one exception, which I actually ran into. If you've had an outbreak of nosema while that comb was on the hive, or an outbreak of something funny looking in your brood, it won't hurt you to eat the honey. Nosema and whatever brood disease it is won't hurt you at all. But if you do feed that back to them, especially in the spring, you're going to be hitting them with the same disease that they're susceptible to. And I actually accidentally didn't recognize that I didn't have a strong brood problem, but I had a small brood problem. And they did pull out of it, but I didn't help them out by feeding them back the honey. It's the one time. So watch for nosema, bee diarrhea, basically. Well, it's closely correlated with bee diarrhea. Blots all over your hive, inside or out. And the brood looks funny. In that case, just take the honey for yourself, feed them back, save sugar. And sugar, table sugar is plant sugar. Sucrose, that's table sugar, is plant sugar. That's why it's so good for the bees. It's what they would pick up if they went out to collect nectar. It's the largest percentage of the sugar in the nectar is sucrose, like your table sugar. And that's why it comes from cane, sugar cane, and from bees, is it is plant sugar. So individual colonies and strains, you could have two hives side by side like that one. I forget how many hives I had that year, but it was the only one that had that problem of deciding to raise the brood. And even if it had lived the next winter, I could have watched it, but if the queen changed, maybe it swarmed by disc split or something, or there was a supersedure, the strain changes. All the bees are mutts, and sometimes it's very difficult to predict what their characteristics are going to be. So don't assume, do the 5-second check and save your hive. Beginners, if you've been to the beginner class, you've already heard this. Watch out, it's nature's calendar. And boy, did that happen this spring with the pouring rain. There's weeks, a week at a time of rain, maybe a Sunday, another week of rain. But I think that the fall is even harder to predict than our spring. At least in our spring, we know that eventually it's going to get better. We just have to keep feeding them if they can't fly out of the hive and get any nectar or any pollen. But right now, okay, it's the middle of August. We're having our hottest temperatures of the year. But actually, it's not that hot. It's raining. And I'm wondering what September's going to look like. Is it going to be a cool, rainy September, and they can't really go out to forage very much? And in some ways, that's good. I think they start realizing, oh, winter's coming. Or will it be a false summer where it looks beautifully sunny and the bees stay active and they keep trying to forage, even if there's nothing to forage? They keep, the foragers go out and they keep trying, and they use up all their stores, and they keep raising brood because they can't see winter coming. I think we're at a disadvantage in that we don't have definite seasons on this side of the mountains. I think it makes a difference. Anybody finds a good researcher who says it better, let me know. It's one of those questions. I really think the bees have troubles. We have to be watching and helping them out. October, usually cool and rainy, but I've seen it bright sunny while it was cool. And again, the foragers are out trying to fly. They're trying to raise brood. They're confused, and they may use up their stores. Even if you had 120 pounds of hive at the end of August, beginning of September, by the end of October, if you think something's funny and they're flying too much, I'd keep feeding them. There's only been 1 year where I fed them basically well into October. I said, I don't understand what's going on, but I kept the liquid feed because it was that warm. Critical questions, let's see. Okay, so you're trying to figure out when the foraging weather, when their active storage using weather is going to end. Knotweed, that's the important one. I got a picture coming up for anyone that does not visualize what knotweed is, because quite often we talk about it for an entire beekeeping meeting, and then somebody says, what's knotweed? It is just absolutely critical as our last big flow for many people in the riparian zones, in the marshy riverside areas. Here's the knotweed. It goes up to like 8 feet tall, and it is the only noxious weed that the Noxious Weed Board in the state of Washington wants to get rid of. And we wish they would stop getting rid of it because it's our fall honey flow. And it makes this really dark, rich honey that some people go, ew, and other people go, wow. Sort of, I'd say almost like molasses. And it's important as to whether bees get an opportunity for cleansing flights. It helps keep their gut fauna, meaning they don't get bee diarrhea. It keeps their flora and fauna in their bee gut on an even level, the way it's supposed to be. And those winter stores, and make notes on all this for your journal, your hive log. And if you stop and look at it, sometimes visually people can stop and look at it and go, oh yeah, you're right. And I'm not sure how accurate this is. I'm working on this. If anybody else would like to take a better look at it, this easily shifts. I think these shift over, like knotweed, mine might finally be opening up. In other places, it opened up at the beginning of August. So this slides like a month each way, but you do notice we basically start running out of options about here. There really isn't much, even if it's sunny. Most of the native vegetation bloomed back. If you go back here and look at the natives, this is, again, there's at least a version of this, a fairly current version of this pollen and nectar source table. There are a number of people who tried to do one of these. I tried to redo it, and I think maybe every person has to look at it and do some adjustments yourself. Some people are nowhere near the Japanese knotweed. I didn't even know there wasn't such a thing as goldenrod in this area. I finally found some. Basically, it's not at my elevation, but I've got a lot of tansy ragwort, whether I want it or not. So you might take a look at this, might make your own in your hive logs.